I am Julian, 26 years old. At 2 in the morning, while I was fast asleep in my own bed, exhausted from working a double shift, my younger brother sneaked into my room, stole my hidden debit card, and completely drained my entire life savings. While I stood there in the living room the next morning, staring at the empty digital balance on my phone screen, my mother looked me dead in the eye and said, "You are overreacting, Julian. He is just a kid." She literally smiled and defended him, right in front of my stepfather, while my brother sat on the living room couch tearing the plastic off a brand new PlayStation 5 bought with my blood, sweat, and years of sacrifice. They laughed in my face. They humiliated me in my own home. But there is one thing they did not know. I was not the silent, submissive punching bag they had grown accustomed to over the past 2 decades. I had a digital paper trail, an ironclad police report waiting to be filed, and a meticulously crafted plan that would soon strip away every ounce of their fake, perfect suburban reputation. And now, they are the ones leaving desperate voicemails, begging for mercy. Before I tell you exactly how I dismantled their perfect little world, hit that like button if you believe in absolute, unapologetic justice. And do not forget to let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Now, let's go back to the exact moment the nightmare began. I was never the kind of person who thought revenge was worth the energy. I always figured karma would eventually handle things in the end, and that holding on to anger would just eat away at my own peace of mind. But let me tell you something about human nature. There is a very special, specific kind of fury that burns deep in your chest when someone you trust, someone you literally shared a roof with your entire life, takes absolutely everything you have worked for, and your own mother tells you that your pain simply does not matter. Up until a few months ago, I still lived at home with my mother, Margaret, my stepfather, Arthur, and my younger half-brother, Caleb. I was 26, and I know what society says about living at home in your 20s, but I was not there because I was lazy or aimless. I was there because it made strict financial sense. I worked entirely remotely as a freelance UI/UX designer. I stacked my salary like a maniac, taking on every single client I could find, from local bakeries needing website revamps to tech startups across the country needing application interfaces. I set a massive goal for myself. I wanted to save enough capital to launch my very own independent design studio by the time I hit 27. I lived an incredibly modest lifestyle. I did not party on the weekends. I did not blow money on dumb stuff like expensive watches or luxury cars. I just worked, saved, slept, and repeated the cycle. And the discipline was actually paying off. I had built up close to $15,000 in my primary savings, and a separate, untouchable fund of exactly $9,000 kept in a totally separate business checking account. I never touched that account unless it was for legitimate studio expenses. The debit card for that specific account stayed in my desk drawer, tucked safely behind a heavy, old external hard drive. It was not even in my wallet. That is how little I interacted with it physically. Now, let me paint a picture of the exact opposite kind of person. My younger brother, Caleb, had just turned 18. He is loud, wildly impulsive, and deeply obsessed with social media clout and appearances. He talks exclusively in internet slang, calls everything he does not understand mid, and somehow genuinely believes he is going to be a famous, wealthy influencer despite never actually producing any content of value. Caleb did not have a job. He had started and quit 3 different part-time retail gigs in the last year alone, always coming home with some dramatic excuse about how the manager was out to get him. His bank account, the last time Arthur forced him to show it, had about $200 in it. Our relationship was rocky, but mostly because every time I tried to be the responsible older brother and teach him about the real world, Margaret and Arthur labeled me as controlling, rigid, or uptight. There was this unspoken, toxic rule in our household. Whenever Caleb messed up, we all had to smile, clean up his mess, and move on. Whenever Julian got frustrated about it, Julian was the one ruining the family mood. I am a highly meticulous person. You have to be in my line of work. I organize my desk like it is a military command center. Everything has a specific place. So when I woke up on a Tuesday morning, poured my coffee, and sat down to start a client call, I immediately noticed something was wrong. That drawer was always closed flush against the desk. That external hard drive was always aligned perfectly to the left edge. But now it was pushed forward slightly, as if someone had opened the drawer in a massive hurry and knocked it out of position. My stomach dropped instantly. I pulled the drawer open. My debit card was gone. At first, I tried to rationalize it. I panicked, tore through my entire room, checked my leather wallet, my laptop bag, my winter jacket pockets, and even dug through the trash can. Absolutely nothing. And then the true, suffocating dread hit me like a physical blow to the chest. I grabbed my phone, opened my banking application, typed in the secure credentials for my studio account, and completely froze. Balance: $6,021.34. Nearly $9,000 was gone. Just erased. I scrolled through the transaction history, and each line item made my stomach churn harder and harder. Apple Store, Supreme, PlayStation Direct, high-end sneaker retail websites. Almost every single purchase was stamped with a time between 2 and 5 in the morning from the night before. I felt like I was watching a psychological horror movie unfold in incredibly slow motion. I could not breathe. I could not think straight. All I knew with absolute certainty was that someone had stolen my card, completely drained nearly 10 grand from an account I had been building for years, and did not even have the basic intelligence to cover their digital tracks. My first instinct was survival. I immediately called the bank's fraud department and froze the card permanently. Then I took a few agonizing minutes to pace around my small bedroom, trying to wrap my head around what on earth I was supposed to do next. And then, filtering up through the floorboards, I heard laughter from downstairs. I walked out of my room, walked slowly down the hallway, and paused at the top of the wooden stairs. I looked down into the living room. Caleb was sitting right in the middle of the expensive rug, surrounded by shipping boxes and pristine retail bags. A brand new PlayStation 5 sat proudly on the coffee table. Fresh, highly coveted designer sneakers lined the hardwood floor. An unopened iPhone Pro lay casually in his lap. My mother, Margaret, was standing right behind him. She had this incredibly proud, glowing smile on her face. I heard her say, "Wow, Caleb, you really made out like a bandit this week. Huh." That was the exact moment something inside my brain completely snapped. I did not yell. I did not storm into the room and start throwing punches or flipping tables. I did not say a single word at first. I just walked down the stairs very slowly, one calculated step at a time, until I stood in the living room doorway like a ghost haunting my own house. Caleb looked up right in the middle of a laugh, and the color instantly drained from his face. He knew. Margaret turned to me, her smile fading slightly. "Julian, what is wrong?" she asked, her voice dripping with fake maternal concern. I looked at Caleb. Then I looked at her. I kept my hands perfectly still at my sides. Then I said, in the absolute calmest, coldest voice I could muster, "Where is my debit card?" Margaret blinked rapidly, acting as if I had just spoken to her in a completely foreign language. "What do you mean, your debit card?" "My studio account debit card. The one I kept locked inside my desk drawer. The one that suddenly went missing in the middle of the night. The one someone just used to blow nearly $9,000 in a matter of hours," I stated clearly. My voice was quiet, but it was not calm. It was absolute ice. Caleb stood up quickly, his knee almost knocking over the expensive PS5 box beside him. "Bro, chill. What are you even talking about?" he stammered. I had seen that fake innocence a million times. It was the same lazy attempt at acting clueless he used when he broke my laptop in high school and blamed the family dog, or when he racked up a massive phone bill and claimed it was spam callers. Every time he got caught, he pulled that same wide-eyed, innocent expression like a toddler who just learned that the stove is hot. And every single time, Margaret ate it up like gospel truth. But this time, I was not giving him a single inch to breathe. I walked straight over to the PlayStation box, grabbed it, and flipped it around. The expedited shipping label was still firmly attached to the cardboard. "Ordered at 2:41 a.m. Shipped to our home address under the name Caleb Miller." I read aloud, my eyes burning a hole through him. His face went totally pale. Margaret looked from Caleb to me, her lips parting slightly. "Julian, I am sure there is some sort of mistake here," she said, her voice trembling. I locked eyes with my mother. "There is. The mistake is thinking I would not notice nearly 10 grand vanishing overnight." She folded her arms across her chest. It was the defensive posture I had seen way too many times. "You cannot prove it was him," she challenged. I pulled my phone out of my pocket, unlocked it, and shoved the screen in her face. Every single charge was made between 2 and 5 in the morning. From this exact house. On websites he constantly browses. Using my exact card number. Caleb panicked. His brain short-circuited. I didn't even know your PIN, man," he blurted out. I stared at him with pure disgust. "I never said the card was a debit with a PIN. It is a Visa. I use it for online transactions. No PIN needed." He physically flinched. He had just handed me his own confession on a silver platter. Margaret looked like she had just been slapped across the face. For a few very long seconds, the living room went completely still. It was the kind of heavy, suffocating stillness that always cracks under the massive weight of denial. And sure enough, Margaret cracked. "Oh, for heaven's sake, Julian," she sighed loudly, throwing her hands up in the air. "He is 18 years old. Do you really think he understands the gravity of what he did?" I was stunned. I felt like the floor had just dropped out from beneath me. "Yes," I said slowly. "He had to sneak into my room, sift through my personal drawers, find the hidden card, memorize the 16-digit number, log online, and go on a shopping spree. That is not a simple accident. That is not a mistake. That is highly calculated theft." Margaret's voice rose, filling the room with her toxic authority. "Julian, enough. You are blowing this way out of proportion. It is not like he physically hurt anyone." I just stared at her, trying to process the absolute absurdity of her words. "You don't think stealing $9,000 from my future hurts?" My voice finally cracked, and I did not even try to hide the pain. "That account was for my business. That is the money I have been saving for years. For my entire future." She gave me a deeply dismissive wave, like I was a toddler throwing a tantrum over a toy. "You are always so serious, Julian. It is just money. You are good with computers. You have a good salary. You will make it back." I clenched my jaw so hard my teeth ached. "That is not the point," I said through gritted teeth. But it did not matter. It never mattered. Because in this house, Caleb's comfort and Caleb's desires always came first. Always. And for the first time in my entire life, I felt the brutal truth of it deep in my bones. This was not just a mother's favoritism. This was willful, malicious blindness. I realized right then that keeping the peace meant destroying myself. But to fully understand how we reached this horrific $9,000 betrayal, you need to understand the 26 years of quiet, soul-crushing theft that came before it. Growing up in our household was like living in an alternate reality where the laws of gravity and consequences only applied to one specific person. Me. My biological father passed away from a sudden heart attack when I was very young. I barely remember his funeral. I just remember the heavy, dark suits, the smell of damp lilies, and the terrifying hollow silence that followed his death. My mother, Margaret, remarried a few years later. She married Arthur, a middle-management corporate drone who cared infinitely more about his weekend golf handicap and enforcing the rules of the local HOA meetings than he ever cared about being a genuine father figure to a grieving little boy. Then Caleb was born. From the exact moment they brought him home from the hospital wrapped in a blue blanket, the entire dynamic of the family shifted permanently. Caleb was the golden child, the miracle baby, the new beginning, the one who could do absolutely no wrong under any circumstances. I, on the other hand, was suddenly relegated to the role of the built-in babysitter, the convenient scapegoat, and the emotional punching bag for whenever Margaret or Arthur had a bad day at the office. The disparity in how we were treated was not just subtle, it was blatantly cruel. If Caleb threw a baseball inside the house and shattered a valuable living room window, Arthur would laugh it off, ruffle the kid's hair, and say that boys will be boys. But if I accidentally left a single water glass in the kitchen sink while rushing upstairs to finish a heavy load of high school homework, Margaret would ground me for a full week and deliver a blistering lecture on how I lacked basic responsibility and respect for her home. The financial abuse started long before the debit card incident. Before my biological father died, he had set up a modest college fund for me. It was not a massive inheritance, but it was enough to cover a decent state university. When I turned 17 and started applying to colleges, I asked Margaret for the account details. She sat me down at the kitchen table, cried fake tears, and told me the money was gone. She claimed they had to drain the account years ago to pay for Caleb's expensive private school tuition because his public school environment was stifling his natural creativity. They stole my father's final gift to me to fund Caleb's privilege. I was forced to take out massive, crippling student loans and work grueling night shifts at a logistics warehouse just to get my degree. I paid for my own textbooks, my own food, and my own life. I never asked them for a single dime, and they never offered. The emotional memories of that blatant favoritism are burned permanently into my brain. I will never forget my 18th birthday. 18 is supposed to be a massive milestone, a transition into adulthood. I came home that evening from working a 12-hour double shift at the warehouse, physically exhausted but holding on to a tiny sliver of hope that maybe, just maybe, my family would acknowledge my existence. I walked into the house. It was completely dark. No cake, no card on the counter, no dinner in the oven. I found Margaret sitting in the living room, bathed in the blue light of the television. When I softly asked her if we were doing anything for my birthday, she did not even bother to turn her head away from her show. Caleb has a slight fever, Julian. We cannot deal with loud noises or celebrating anything today. Just go make yourself a sandwich in the kitchen. Arthur walked in right after, patted me aggressively on the shoulder, and told me to man up because real adults do not cry over silly birthdays. I ended up driving my beat-up car to a local gas station, buying a stale chocolate cupcake wrapped in plastic, and eating it entirely alone in the empty parking lot while the rain poured down. That was the grim reality of my existence in that house. I was completely invisible until they needed something from me. But the psychological toll of Margaret's manipulation did not just stay within the walls of our home. It infected my outside relationships like a virus. My ex-girlfriend, Sarah, was someone I deeply loved and trusted. We dated for 3 solid years during college. I genuinely thought she was my sanctuary, the one person in the world who truly saw me and understood the pain I carried. But Margaret possessed a terrifying, almost sociopathic talent for manipulation. She played the tragic victim flawlessly to any outsider who walked through our front door. Whenever Sarah came over for our massive Thanksgiving dinners, Margaret would put on the performance of a lifetime. She would act like the deeply loving, wildly overworked mother who just wanted her distant, cold, ungrateful eldest son to connect with the family. She would sigh dramatically while passing the mashed potatoes and whisper quietly to Sarah in the kitchen about how hard I was to reach and how my stubbornness was breaking her heart. Eventually, the poison worked. Sarah bought into the narrative completely. She started taking my mother's side in every single argument. Our relationship ended on a freezing Tuesday night in my tiny, cramped college apartment. I had just finished venting to her about how Arthur had demanded I pay a portion of their property taxes if I wanted to continue storing 2 boxes of my winter clothes in their attic. Sarah looked at me. Her face hardened with an ugly, judgmental expression. "You are just so bitter all the time, Julian," she said, slowly shaking her head. "They are your family. You hold on to these petty grudges instead of just being the bigger person. Your mom cries to me on the phone about how much you push them away. You need to stop being so stingy, rigid, and unforgiving." She walked out the door and never came back, breaking my heart into a million pieces in the process. It felt exactly like a messy, devastating divorce. But the absolute worst part was not losing her. The worst part was the agonizing realization that my mother had successfully gaslit the woman I loved into believing I was the villain of my own life story. Margaret had isolated me perfectly. She made sure that if I ever spoke out against their abuse, nobody in the world would ever believe me. That was the exact reason why I stayed quiet for so many years. I convinced myself that if I just kept my head down, swallowed my pride, saved my salary, and focused entirely on my career, I could quietly escape without causing an explosion. I treated my business savings account like a sacred lifeline. Every single dollar I deposited into it was a heavy brick in the massive wall I was building between my future and their endless toxicity. And now, Caleb had taken a sledgehammer to that wall. Standing in the living room, listening to my mother tell me that $9,000 was just money, and that I could easily earn it back, the years of suppressed rage, grief, and humiliation finally crystallized into absolute, terrifying clarity. This was not a simple mistake. This was not a teenage boy being impulsive. This was the direct result of a lifetime of them believing they were completely entitled to my life, my labor, and my resources. "You are not even going to punish him, are you?" I asked, my voice completely flat and devoid of emotion. Silence filled the room. Arthur stared intensely at his golf shoes. Caleb actually smirked, a real, genuine smirk, while hiding behind his mother's back. "I am filing a police report," I stated clearly. Margaret's head snapped up so fast I thought she might break her neck. "What? No, you are absolutely not doing that. This is not just a family issue, it is a misunderstanding. You cannot do that to your own brother. He is just a kid." "He is a thief," I replied sharply. "And if this family will not hold him accountable, I guarantee you the law will." That is when Margaret's carefully constructed mask truly slipped off. She took a step toward me, her face contorted into a vicious, venomous expression I had never seen directed at me so openly. Her voice dropped to a low, menacing hiss. "If you go to the police," she threatened, pointing a finger directly at my chest, "you will regret it for the rest of your life." I stopped cold. "Is that a threat?" I asked. She widened her eyes, doubling down on her rage. "Think about it, Julian. If you make this massive mistake public, what do you think will happen to me? To our families standing in this community? You think I can afford a high-priced lawyer right now? You think people in the neighborhood won't judge me for raising a criminal?" I stared at the woman who gave birth to me, feeling absolutely nothing but pity and disgust. "So, your only concern right now is your social reputation, not the undeniable fact that your golden son just robbed me blind." Her face hardened into stone. "You always think you are better than us, that you are smarter, more mature. But you are not. You are just a selfish boy with a laptop and a massive superiority complex." I did not argue. I did not scream back. I simply turned around, walked back up the stairs, went into my room, and locked the door behind me. I opened my laptop, connected to the internet, and finalized the extensive fraud report with my bank's security department. Then, I pulled up the official website for the local police department and formally submitted a detailed report for identity theft and financial fraud. I attached every single screenshot, every timestamp, and every piece of digital evidence I had gathered. The line in the sand had been crossed, and there was absolutely no going back. I barely slept a single minute that night. I just lay there on my mattress, staring up at the dark ceiling, while the muffled, electronic sounds of Caleb playing his stolen PlayStation 5 vibrated constantly through the floorboards. He was not worried. Margaret was not worried. Arthur was not worried. They genuinely believed I was bluffing. They thought I would cave under the pressure, just like I did when I gave up my expensive headphones on Christmas, just like I did when I paid for my own college education, just like I always did to keep the fragile peace in that house. But the Julian who sacrificed himself to keep the peace died the exact moment Margaret threatened my future to protect her own reputation. The next morning, the house was eerily quiet. The heavy tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. I got out of bed, packed my laptop, my remaining hard drives, and my most essential work gear into my heavy backpack, and walked downstairs to the kitchen to pour myself a cup of bitter black coffee. At exactly 9:15 a.m., the landline phone mounted on the kitchen wall rang loudly. Margaret, who was aggressively scrubbing a perfectly clean countertop, answered it. I stood perfectly still in the kitchen doorway, gripping my coffee mug, watching her face closely. She said hello, listened for a few painful seconds, and then the color completely drained from her face, leaving her looking sickly pale. Her hand started visibly shaking against the plastic receiver. Yes, this is his mother, she stammered. What? No, officer. There has to be a massive misunderstanding here. My son is a good boy. She slammed the phone down onto the receiver, her eyes wide with sheer, unadulterated panic, and slowly turned her head to look at me. Arthur walked in from the garage, wiping grease off his hands with a rag. Was that the police? He asked nervously. You actually filed the police report, Margaret screamed, her voice echoing violently off the kitchen tiles. She lunged forward, stopping just inches from my face, her skin red with absolute rage. They called me this morning. They said they are officially investigating my son. Your own brother. Are you completely insane? I took a very slow, deliberate sip of my hot coffee. I did not break eye contact. He committed a felony. I told you exactly what I was going to do. You are seriously going to ruin his entire life over some stupid designer sneakers and a video game console? She yelled, tears of angry frustration welling up in her eyes. I finally set the coffee mug down on the counter with a loud clack. He already ruined something, I said flatly. My trust, my business plans, my entire life savings. Why does his life matter so much more than mine? He is a child, Julian, she shrieked. He is a thief, I fired back. And if this family refuses to hold him accountable, someone else has to. Arthur stepped up, puffing out his chest to look physically intimidating. You listen to me, you ungrateful punk, he growled, pointing a thick finger in my face. You do not bring the cops into this house. We handle things internally. As a family. We are not a family, I shot back, staring directly into Arthur's eyes without blinking. A family does not steal from each other while they sleep. A family does not defend the thief and threaten the victim. If you want to protect a criminal, that is your choice. But my money is gone, and I am getting it back, one way or another. Margaret's expression morphed from panic into something entirely different. It was pure, unadulterated hatred. It was the kind of look you give a dangerous stranger who just broke into your home, not a look a mother gives her son. She pointed a trembling hand straight at the front door. You are not welcome here anymore, she declared, her voice dripping with venom. Get your things and get out of my house immediately. I do not ever want to see your face again. There it was, the ultimate betrayal. The exact moment I officially became the villain in my own home. I did not break down crying. I did not argue. I did not beg her to reconsider her insane logic. I just nodded my head slowly. I walked upstairs, pulled 2 large, heavy duffel bags from the top shelf of my closet, and threw all my clothes, my remaining electronics, my important documents, and my shoes inside. It took me less than 45 minutes to pack up my entire 26 years of existence in that house. When I dragged my heavy bags down the wooden stairs, Caleb was standing in the hallway, leaning casually against the wall with his arms crossed. He had his new, expensive headphones resting around his neck. He had the absolute audacity to smirk and roll his eyes at me. No apology, no look of guilt, just pure, entitled arrogance. Margaret stood next to Arthur at the bottom of the stairs, her arms tightly crossed, watching me leave like she was watching a complete stranger being evicted. I opened the heavy front door, stepped out into the sticky, humid June morning air, and loaded my bags into the cramped trunk of my beat-up sedan. I started the engine, put the car in drive, and drove away without looking back in the rearview mirror even once. I spent that first night sleeping in the driver's seat of my car, parked in the dark, quiet back corner of a 24-hour Walmart parking lot a few towns over. My neck ached terribly. My lower back throbbed from the awkward angle of the seat. The harsh glare of the orange streetlights bled through the windshield. But strangely enough, as I lay there staring at the stained fabric of my car roof, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief wash over me. There is a very strange, very potent freedom in knowing you have absolutely nothing left to lose. The next morning, the harsh reality of my situation hit me hard. I had barely any cash left in my checking account to buy gas or food. I desperately needed a physical address to keep working my freelance contracts, and I needed a stable Wi-Fi connection to communicate with my clients. I swallowed my massive pride, opened my phone, and scrolled down my contact list until I found Marcus. Marcus and I had been very close friends in high school, but we drifted apart when I went off to college and he started working full-time in construction. Despite the distance, he was the most loyal, no-nonsense guy I knew. I texted him, asking if he knew of any cheap, run-down places to rent, or if I could just crash on his living room floor for a few days while I figured out a massive family emergency. Marcus called me back in less than 3 minutes. "Where are you right now?" he asked bluntly. I told him I was sitting in a Walmart parking lot. "Start your engine and drive to my place right now. I have a basement unit I've been trying to clean up. It is not pretty, but it has a lock on the door, a working shower, and it is yours for as long as you need it to get back on your feet." 2 hours later, I was hauling my heavy duffel bags down a narrow set of creaky wooden stairs into a dim, concrete basement apartment. It smelled strongly of old carpet, laundry detergent, and damp earth. There was a bare mattress lying directly on the floor, exposed copper pipes running overhead, and a tiny, dirty window that looked out onto the dirt driveway. To me, looking at it through exhausted eyes, it looked like an absolute palace. "First week is entirely free," Marcus said, tossing me a slightly rusted spare key. "After that, just give me whatever you can afford until you get your feet firmly under you. Do not let those toxic people break you, Julian. You are infinitely better than them." I shook his rough hand, fighting back the heavy lump forming in my throat. I set up my laptop on a wobbly plastic folding table, connected to his Wi-Fi network, and took a deep, steadying breath. The massive storm had officially hit my life, but I was absolutely not going to let it drown me. I was going to use the heavy wreckage they left behind to build an indestructible fortress. The bank's fraud investigator had already emailed me, confirming they were heavily looking into the IP addresses of the purchases. Detective Miller from the local police precinct had left a stern voicemail stating they were formally requesting the detailed shipping logs from Apple and PlayStation. The legal wheels of justice were slowly turning, grinding forward with the unstoppable, crushing weight of the law. I sat down in that damp, cold basement, opened my complex design software, and went straight to work. I had lost a major battle, but the war had just begun, and I knew, deep down in my bones, that I was going to win. The first entire month living down in Marcus's basement was purely about brutal, unfiltered survival. I completely morphed into a machine. I worked grueling, mind-numbing 18-hour days, desperately taking on every single freelance gig I could possibly find on the internet. I completely redesigned local dental clinic websites from scratch, ran exhaustive UX audits for struggling e-commerce platforms, and even coded an entire mobile application prototype for a demanding tech startup based over in Berlin. I practically lived off cheap cups of instant ramen noodles and endless pots of bitter, black coffee. I worked primarily from the wobbly plastic folding table Marcus had given me, or sometimes from the back seat of my car when I needed to drive closer to town to steal better Wi-Fi from a local coffee shop. My lower back constantly ached with a dull, throbbing pain from sitting in a cheap, unsupportive folding chair, and my eyes burned intensely from staring at the bright screen in the dim, depressing basement light. It was not glamorous in the slightest, but it was mine. The space belonged to me. Every single time I felt a wave of crushing exhaustion, every time I desperately wanted to close my laptop and give up, my mind flashed back to Caleb's arrogant smirk. I thought about Margaret's cold, dismissive, hateful eyes as she told me to get out of her house. Those toxic memories were pure, unadulterated high-octane fuel for my ambition. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, the relentless bureaucratic gears started turning in my favor. The bank's extensive fraud investigation concluded its first phase, and they officially refunded about 80% of the stolen money back into my account. It was not the full $9,000 yet, but seeing that number jump back up on my banking app was enough to let me breathe again. It gave me enough capital to finally pay Marcus proper, fair rent, and buy decent groceries instead of surviving on sodium-filled noodles. Meanwhile, the official police case against Caleb was quietly but steadily moving forward. Because he was technically still a minor in the eyes of certain state laws regarding financial crimes, the legal process was significantly slower and required much more delicate handling. I received multiple follow-up calls from Detective Miller. They asked if I had any more documentation. I sent them massive files containing emails, heavily annotated screenshots, detailed invoices, and everything I could legally gather. During all of this chaotic time, the silence from my biological family was absolutely deafening. Not a single text message asking if I was okay. Not a single phone call checking to see if I was sleeping on the cold streets or starving to death. They had completely and utterly written me off as a lost cause. But then, about 6 long weeks after I was viciously kicked out of my childhood home, I walked out to Marcus's dented metal mailbox and found a crisp white envelope with my name written on it. It was a handwritten letter from Margaret. I carried it carefully down the wooden stairs to the basement, sat on the edge of my mattress, and tore it open. The note was relatively short, written in her perfectly neat, practiced cursive handwriting. Julian, I truly hope you are okay. I miss you. I did not know how to handle everything that night, and I realize now that I failed both of you boys in very different ways. I am so sorry I did not protect you when I should have. If you ever want to talk and clear the air, I am here. Love, Mom. I read the short paragraph 4 separate times. For a brief, split second, a pathetic, desperate part of my deeply wounded inner child desperately wanted to believe her words were genuine. I wanted to believe she had actually spent the last month reflecting on her horrific actions and realized the magnitude of her maternal failure. But then, my thumb brushed against the bottom of the paper, and I flipped the letter over. There, tucked away in the bottom left corner of the envelope, scribbled very faintly in dull gray pencil, was a secondary note. It was clearly frantically added at the very last minute right before she dropped the envelope into the postal box. Caleb does not know I am writing this to you. Please do not mention it to him or Arthur. I stared intently at those faint pencil marks, and an icy, terrifying chill ran rapidly down my spine. The fragile illusion of her apology shattered instantly into a million pieces. This was not a genuine, heartfelt apology from a remorseful mother. This was highly calculated damage control. She was absolutely terrified. The ongoing police investigation was clearly putting immense, suffocating pressure on their household, and she was trying to emotionally manipulate me into dropping the serious felony charges entirely behind her golden boy's back. Just as I tossed the letter onto the table in disgust, my cell phone buzzed violently. It was a direct text message from my cousin, Chloe. Chloe had always been considered the rebel of the extended family, the only one who consistently saw right through Margaret's perfectly manicured suburban facade. Hey Julian, the text read. Weird question for you. Did you actually buy Caleb that brand new iPhone and all those crazy designer sneakers as a graduation gift? Because that is exactly what he has been telling the whole extended family. My blood ran absolutely cold. I immediately pressed her name and called her. What exactly did he say to you? I asked the very second she picked up the line. I saw him at Aunt Linda's house on Sunday for a barbecue, Chloe explained. Her voice hushed as if she was afraid of being overheard. He was showing off the new PS5 to the younger cousins and wearing these crazy expensive, limited edition Yeezys. When Aunt Linda explicitly asked how an unemployed teenager afforded it, he told everyone in the backyard that you finally got a massive promotion at a tech firm and bought all of it for him because you felt incredibly guilty for being so hard on him growing up. He literally had this whole sob story about how you two finally had a heart-to-heart talk and made total peace. I gripped the plastic edge of my phone so tight my knuckles turned completely white. Chloe, listen to me very carefully. He stole my debit card. He drained my business account of $9,000 in the middle of the night. My mom kicked me out onto the street when I called the cops to report the theft. Chloe gasped loudly, sucking in air on the other end of the line. Oh my God. Julian, I am so incredibly sorry. I knew something was horribly wrong, because Margaret was sitting right next to him on the patio chair while he told that ridiculous story, and she just nodded along and smiled proudly. The horrifying realization hit me with the force of a speeding freight train. This was absolutely not just Caleb trying to save face and look cool in front of his relatives. This was a highly coordinated, meticulously calculated public relations campaign engineered directly by my own mother to protect her precious reputation. They were actively gaslighting our entire extended family, using my name, my supposed promotion, and my fabricated guilt to cover up a federal financial felony. I thanked Chloe profusely for her honesty, hung up the phone, and immediately opened my laptop. My mind was racing at 1,000,000 miles an hour. If Caleb was arrogant and stupid enough to lie to the entire family, what else was he currently doing behind the scenes? How was an unemployed 18-year-old kid planning to keep all that highly traceable merchandise without raising massive suspicion from his friends or the authorities? I suddenly remembered that the detailed bank transactions showed multiple large purchases from high-end sneaker retail and resale sites. But Caleb did not just wear expensive sneakers to look cool. He was deeply obsessed with the lucrative idea of being a high-end reseller. He always talked endlessly about flipping limited edition shoes on the internet for massive profit margins. I needed to find out exactly what they were actively doing with my stolen money. I desperately needed concrete, undeniable proof that Margaret was involved, not just as a passive bystander who turned a blind eye to her son's crimes, but as an active, willing participant in the ongoing fraud. I cracked my knuckles loudly in the quiet basement, opened a fresh, secure browser window, and began to relentlessly dig into the digital footprints my foolish younger brother had left behind. I was no longer just the helpless victim hiding in a basement. I was the lead investigator of my own case, and I was about to completely blow their entire house of cards straight to the ground. I sat in Marcus's damp basement, staring at my laptop screen, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Chloe's revelation had completely shifted the landscape of this war. If Caleb was actively telling our extended family that I had bought him all those luxury items because I got a massive promotion, it meant there was a deliberate, structured narrative being built. But I needed hard, undeniable proof. I opened the digital folder where I had saved all the evidence for the police and my bank. I pulled up the screenshots of the confirmation emails from the night of the theft. I scrutinized every single pixel. The purchases from Apple and PlayStation were straightforward, but the charges from the high-end sneaker resale sites caught my attention. I noticed something I had missed in my initial panic. The confirmation emails for the designer shoes were not sent to Caleb's usual obnoxious gaming email address. They were sent to an unfamiliar domain, miller92shop@outlook.com. My brother was born in the late 2000s. He had no connection to the number 92. But my mother, Margaret, and my stepfather, Arthur, had gotten married in 1992. I copied the email address and went straight to Luxdrop, the most notorious online forum for sneaker resellers and hypebeast scalpers. It is a shady, high-markup marketplace where kids flip limited edition shoes for massive profits. I clicked the login button, pasted the email, and hit forgot password. The security question popped up. What is your mother's maiden name? Caleb was not a criminal mastermind. He was a lazy, entitled teenager who always took the path of least resistance. I typed in Margaret's maiden name. Incorrect. I tried the name of his first pet. Incorrect. Then, I remembered his absolute obsession with a specific vintage sports car Arthur owned before he was born. I typed in Mustang. The screen loaded. Password reset link sent. Since I did not have access to the actual email inbox, I knew I had to act fast before Caleb noticed anything suspicious. I used a backdoor verification trick I had learned during my years of doing freelance UX audits for e-commerce security. It took me about 20 minutes of intense coding and rerouting, but finally, I bypassed the two-factor authentication and gained full access to the Luxdrop account dashboard. I clicked on the direct messaging inbox on the forum. It was full of order confirmations, tracking numbers, and aggressive negotiations with potential buyers. Most of them were placed between 2 and 4:30 in the morning on the exact night my debit card was drained. But then, My eyes locked onto a specific message thread. It was not a message to a buyer. It was a forwarded email chain saved in the drafts folder, seemingly used to copy and paste tracking numbers. The title of the email thread was, Need help moving a few items fast. Mom said you'd help. The recipient of the original email was my mother's personal email address. My hands began to physically shake as I opened the draft. The first message was from Caleb. Hey, just got the stuff in the mail. Mom said you could help me list a few things on here and flip them fast before Julian notices the bank statement. Got some Yeezys Jordan 1s and the PS5. Want to keep the iPhone though, lol. And right beneath it was my mother's reply. Keep it extremely low profile, Caleb. Do not list too much at once or it will flag the website security. If anyone in the family asks where you got the shoes, stick to the script. Say you used your savings and got a little help from your big brother as a graduation gift because he got a huge salary bump. Do exactly as I say. I will handle Julian when he finds out. He won't do anything. There it was. The absolute, undeniable smoking gun. The nail in the coffin. Margaret did not just excuse his horrific behavior after the fact. She did not just ignore the theft to protect him. She actively helped him cover it up. She was the architect of the entire gaslighting campaign. Every single flash of guilt I thought I saw in that pathetic, handwritten apology letter was completely gone. That was not maternal guilt. That was calculated, desperate strategy. She was terrified that I would keep digging, terrified that the police case would move forward, and terrified that her perfect, pristine neighborhood reputation would shatter into a million pieces. I took high-resolution screenshots of every single word, saved them to 3 separate external hard drives, and backed them up to a secure cloud server. Just as I was finishing the backups, my phone buzzed on the table. It was a text message from Sarah, my ex-girlfriend, the same woman who had broken my heart and taken my family's side. Hey Julian, the text read. I know it has been a while, and I know things ended badly between us. But I heard through the grapevine that things are really rough with your family right now. I feel terrible about how I left things. Can we please meet up for coffee? I just want to apologize and see how you are doing. My treat. I stared at the screen for a long time. My initial instinct was to block her immediately. She had made her choice. But a strange, nagging feeling in my gut told me this timing was way too coincidental. Margaret had sent a fake apology letter. Caleb was spreading lies to the extended family. And now, out of nowhere, Sarah wanted to meet up and apologize? I decided to play along. I needed to see exactly how far they were willing to take this charade. Sure, I texted back. The diner on 4th Street. 1 hour. I put on a clean shirt, grabbed my car keys, and drove through the pouring rain to the diner. It was one of those classic, run-down American diners with sticky laminated menus, red vinyl booths, and the constant smell of burnt coffee and frying bacon. I walked in, the bell above the door chiming loudly, and scanned the room. Sarah was sitting in a booth near the back. She looked up and offered a warm, incredibly convincing smile. I walked over and slid into the booth across from her. Julian, you look exhausted, she said softly, reaching across the table to touch my hand. I pulled my hand back immediately. I have been busy. What do you want, Sarah? I asked, keeping my voice completely neutral. She sighed, looking down at her coffee mug. I just wanted to say I am sorry. I did not understand the dynamics of your family back then. I thought you were just being difficult. But your mom called me yesterday, crying hysterically. She told me you moved out and that you are trying to press felony charges against Caleb over some stupid misunderstanding about a college fund or a debit card. Julian, you cannot do this to them. It is going to destroy them. I felt a cold, bitter laugh bubble up in my chest. So this is not an apology. You are here as an emissary for Margaret. Before Sarah could respond, the bell above the diner door chimed again. I looked up. Walking through the door, shaking the rain off their expensive coats, were Margaret and Arthur. They spotted our booth immediately and walked straight toward us. The trap was sprung. Sarah had set me up, She had lured me here so my parents could ambush me in a public place where they assumed I would not make a scene. Arthur slid into the booth right next to Sarah, effectively trapping her, while Margaret pulled up a chair and sat directly at the end of the table, boxing me in. "Julian," Margaret said, folding her hands neatly on the table. She was wearing her expensive pearl earrings and a perfectly pressed blouse. She looked the absolute picture of a concerned, loving mother. "Thank you for coming. And thank you, Sarah, for helping us facilitate this. We just want to bring our boy home." I leaned back against the red vinyl, crossing my arms. "You kicked me out. You literally told me I was never welcome in your house again." "Tempers were high," Arthur barked, his face instantly turning red. "We were all emotional. But this nonsense with the police ends today. Do you have any idea the kind of stress you are putting your mother through? She hasn't slept in weeks." "I haven't slept in weeks because I am living in a concrete basement," I replied coldly. "Your son stole $9,000 from my business account. I am not dropping the charges." Margaret let out a dramatic, wavering sigh. She reached into her designer purse and pulled out a standard white business envelope. She pushed it slowly across the sticky table toward me. "Julian, please. We are a family," she whispered, her eyes welling up with highly practiced tears. "Inside that envelope is a cashier's check for $2,000. It is all the liquid cash Arthur and I can spare right now with the real estate market being so unpredictable. Take the money. Use it to get a nice apartment. Just call the detective and tell him it was a massive misunderstanding. Tell him you gave Caleb permission to use the card and forgot." I stared at the envelope. $2,000. They wanted to buy my silence, my dignity, and my future for $2,000, while Caleb sat at home playing on a console bought with my money. "And if I refuse?" I asked calmly. Arthur leaned forward, pointing a thick, aggressive finger directly at my face. "If you refuse, I swear to God, Julian, I will hire the most vicious lawyer in this city. I will hit you with a massive civil lawsuit for defamation of character and emotional distress. I will drag your name through the mud. I will make sure every freelance client you have ever worked for knows you are a pathological liar who tries to destroy his own flesh and blood out of pure jealousy. You have no money. You have no power. You cannot win this." Sarah sat there, silently nodding along with Arthur's threat. The absolute betrayal in her eyes was sickening. They were so incredibly smug. They sat there in that cheap diner, completely convinced that they held all the cards. They thought my lack of wealth meant a lack of intelligence. They thought their threats of lawsuits and their fake tears would force me back into the tiny, submissive box they had kept me in for 26 years. I looked at Sarah, then at Arthur, and finally, I locked eyes with Margaret. "You think you are so smart, Mom," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Yet it cut through the diner noise like a freshly sharpened razor. "You think you can just rewrite reality whenever it gets uncomfortable. But you forgot one very important thing." "What is that?" Margaret challenged, her eyes narrowing into cold slits. I stood up from the booth. I looked down at the pathetic envelope of money, then looked back at her. "I am the one who set up your home Wi-Fi network," I said softly. "I am the one who knows exactly how the internet works. And I am the one who just read the emails between you and Caleb explicitly discussing how to fence my stolen property on Luxdrop to hide the evidence." The smugness evaporated from Margaret's face so fast it was almost comical. She physically recoiled, her mouth dropping open in sheer, unadulterated terror. Arthur looked completely confused, totally unaware of the depth of his wife's active involvement in the crime. "Enjoy your coffee," I said. I turned around and walked out of the diner, leaving them sitting in the exact trap of complacency they had built for themselves. The storm was no longer just approaching. I was about to unleash a hurricane. I drove back to Marcus's basement with a terrifying, absolute clarity in my mind. The anxiety that had plagued me for weeks was completely gone, replaced by a cold, calculating sense of purpose. Margaret and Arthur thought they could threaten me with a fake lawsuit. They thought they could use my ex-girlfriend to manipulate my emotions. They thought they could weaponize the concept of family to escape the consequences of a federal felony. They were incredibly wrong. I walked down the creaky wooden stairs, locked the basement door behind me, and sat down at my wobbly folding table. I opened my laptop. It was time to stop fighting them behind closed doors. It was time to pull them out into the blinding light of public opinion. If Margaret cared so deeply about her pristine suburban reputation and her precious standing in the local real estate community, then that is exactly what I was going to systematically dismantle. I spent the next 6 hours writing. I did not write an angry, emotional rant. I did not use curse words or make wild, unfounded accusations. I treated it like I was designing a high-level corporate presentation. I wrote a massive, comprehensive, incredibly thoughtful article. I titled it, "When Your Family Chooses the Thief Over You, A Cautionary Tale of Financial Abuse and Enablers." I started the article by detailing the exact timeline of the theft. I explained how the card was hidden, how the funds were the culmination of years of brutal freelance work, and how the money was intended for my future business. I described the sickening moment I walked downstairs to find my brother unboxing a PlayStation 5 and my mother smiling at him. Then I brought out the heavy artillery. I uploaded the screenshots of my bank statements, heavily redacting my personal account numbers but leaving the timestamps and the merchant names completely visible. I uploaded a blurred but highly recognizable photo I had quietly snapped of the stolen merchandise sitting in our living room. But the absolute centerpiece of the entire article, the devastating twist that would ensure Margaret could never show her face at another HOA meeting or church gathering again, were the emails. I posted the exact screenshots of the draft emails I had extracted from Caleb's sneaker forum account. I blacked out Margaret's specific email address for legal compliance, but I left the content entirely unedited. Keep it extremely low profile, Caleb. If anyone in the family asks where you got the shoes, stick to the script. Say you used your savings and got a little help from your big brother as a graduation gift. I will handle Julian when he finds out. He won't do anything. I included a written statement from my cousin Chloe, who had explicitly given me permission to share her story anonymously. I detailed how Caleb had lied to the entire extended family at Aunt Linda's barbecue, using my name to legitimize his stolen goods. I explained how my mother sat there and smiled while he lied. I ended the massive article with a simple, chilling conclusion. The people who are supposed to protect you the most are sometimes the very people holding the knife. When that happens, walking away is not a betrayal. It is the purest form of survival. Do not let toxic parents disguise their financial abuse as family loyalty. I read through the entire piece 3 times, checking for grammar, tone, and legal boundaries. I made sure there was no direct slander, only verifiable, documented facts. Then, I took a deep breath, hovered my mouse over the publish button on Medium, and clicked it. But I didn't stop there. I needed maximum exposure. Dylan, another buddy of mine who worked in digital marketing, had previously told me that if I ever wanted to tell my story, he would help me push it. I sent him the link. Within an hour, he had cross-posted the article to multiple massive subreddits dealing with toxic families, financial independence, and legal advice. He pushed it on Twitter, tagging major accounts that discussed narcissistic abuse. Then, I closed my laptop, lay back on my mattress, and waited. The internet is a wild, unpredictable beast. Sometimes it ignores you completely, but sometimes, when a story strikes the exact right nerve of universal injustice, it ignites like gasoline. When I woke up the next morning and opened my laptop, my browser nearly crashed. The Medium article had surpassed 80,000 views overnight. The Reddit posts had tens of thousands of upvotes and thousands of comments. My inbox was completely flooded with messages from absolute strangers. People were sharing their own horrific stories of family betrayal, of siblings stealing their inheritances, of parents draining their college funds, of being the scapegoat in a toxic household. The article had gone massively, unstoppably viral. At exactly 11:42 a.m., my cell phone rang. I looked at the screen. The caller ID simply read, Margaret. I let it ring 3 times, enjoying the sheer panic I knew was occurring on the other end of the line. Finally, I swiped to answer and put the phone on speaker, placing it on the table. "Hello," I said calmly. "Take it down," Margaret screamed. It was not a request. It was the desperate, unhinged shriek of a woman watching her entire life burn to the ground in real time. "Take that article down right now, Julian. Are you out of your psychotic mind?" I leaned back in my chair. "I see you read my latest piece of writing. Did you like the formatting? I thought the screenshots really tied the whole narrative together." "You are destroying us," she sobbed, her voice cracking violently. "Do you have any idea what you have done? My phone has not stopped ringing since 6 in the morning. Aunt Linda saw it. Arthur's boss saw it. The neighbors are posting it in the community Facebook group. You are publicly humiliating our entire family." "No, Margaret," I replied, my voice dropping to a low, deadly calm. "I did not humiliate you. Caleb humiliated you when he decided to become a thief. You humiliated yourself when you decided to become his accomplice. All I did was hold up a mirror. If you do not like the ugly reflection staring back at you, that is your problem, not mine. We will sue you. Arthur is calling a lawyer right now," she threatened, though the fear in her voice made the threat sound incredibly pathetic. "Go ahead," I challenged smoothly. "Please hire a lawyer. Take me to civil court. I would absolutely love the opportunity to present those emails to a judge during the discovery phase. I would love for you to explain under oath why you instructed your son to fence stolen property. You think you are embarrassed now? Wait until your name is permanently attached to a public court record." There was a long, agonizing silence on the other end of the line. All I could hear was her heavy, ragged breathing. She finally realized she had absolutely no leverage left. The threats were useless. The manipulation was dead. "Julian, please," she whispered, her voice breaking into genuine, terrified sobs. "Please, I am begging you. Caleb cannot even go to school today. People are sending him horrible messages. I can't show my face at work. My real estate clients are canceling their listings with me. You have made your point. Please just take it off the internet. I will do anything." I stared at the phone, feeling a strange, profound sense of closure. The woman who had tormented me, minimized my pain, and threatened my future was now reduced to begging for mercy from a damp basement. "You told me that $9,000 was just money, and that I would make it back," I said softly. "Well, reputation is just public opinion, Margaret. I'm sure you will make it back." I hung up the phone. I didn't just end the call. I went into my settings and permanently blocked her number. I blocked Arthur. I blocked Caleb. I blocked Sarah. I severed the infected limbs completely. Let's pause for a moment. Thank you for staying with me this far. You're truly amazing. Please help me by liking the video and commenting the number 1 below so I know you've been here with me until this point. This not only helps more people discover this story, but also lets me know that my experiences mean something to someone. Your support is the greatest motivation for me to keep sharing the rest of this journey. The fallout from the viral article was incredibly swift and absolutely devastating for my former family. The mask of suburban perfection they had spent decades meticulously crafting was shattered beyond any hope of repair. 2 days after the article went live, Margaret drove down to the local police precinct in a complete panic. According to what Detective Miller later told me, she walked into the station, tears streaming down her face, and desperately tried to formally retract her previous statements. She claimed the entire situation was a massive family misunderstanding, that she had given Caleb permission to use the card, and that she did not want to press any charges against her son. She essentially tried to throw herself on the grenade to stop the investigation. Detective Miller, a seasoned veteran who had zero tolerance for manipulative parents, shut her down instantly. He coldly informed her that she was not the primary victim in the case. The stolen funds belonged entirely to an adult, me. The police report was filed strictly under my name, and the digital evidence I had provided, including the newly discovered emails, was overwhelming. The case was completely out of her hands, and attempting to obstruct an active felony investigation could result in criminal charges for her as well. She left the precinct trembling, Meanwhile, my own life was finally taking a massive upward trajectory. The viral exposure of the article did not just bring me vindication. It brought me incredible professional opportunities. A major tech firm CEO named Mr. Sterling had read the article on LinkedIn after it was shared by a prominent design executive. He was impressed not only by my UI/UX portfolio, which I had linked in my bio, but by the sheer meticulousness and logic of how I had dismantled a complex problem. He offered me a highly lucrative long-term contract as a senior design consultant for his firm. The salary was life-changing. It was the exact break I needed to finally climb out of Marcus's basement. But Margaret was not done trying to drag me down. About a week after I started working at Mr. Sterling's pristine, glass-walled corporate office downtown, the receptionist called my desk. She sounded deeply alarmed. She said there was a woman in the lobby screaming my name and demanding to see me immediately. I walked out of the creative department and looked down at the main lobby. It was Margaret. She looked completely unhinged. Her hair was messy, her clothes were wrinkled, and she was pacing furiously near the security desk. "Julian!" she shrieked the second she saw me, pointing a finger up at the balcony. "You come down here right now. You need to fix this. Arthur is talking about a divorce because the neighborhood is treating us like pariahs. You ruined my life." Several of my new co-workers stepped out of their offices, murmuring and staring at the spectacle. Trent, a deeply arrogant rival designer in my department who had been incredibly jealous of my new contract, smirked and leaned against a glass partition. "Wow, Julian," Trent said loudly, making sure the entire floor could hear. "Bringing your toxic family drama into a professional corporate environment? That is incredibly unprofessional. Maybe Mr. Sterling made a massive mistake hiring a guy who sues his own mother." Before I could even respond to Trent's pathetic attempt to throw me under the bus, the heavy oak doors of the executive suite swung open. Mr. Sterling, a tall, imposing man in a tailored suit, stepped out. He surveyed the chaotic scene with absolute, terrifying calm. He looked down at Margaret, who was still hyperventilating in the lobby, and then looked at Trent. "Trent," Mr. Sterling said, his voice echoing through the silent office. "Pack your desk. You are fired." Trent's smug smile instantly vanished. "What, sir? I didn't do anything. He's the one with the crazy mother. I hired Julian because he possesses immense talent, integrity, and the absolute spine to stand up to toxic abusers," Mr. Sterling replied coldly. "You, on the other hand, just proved that you are a petty, toxic opportunist who thrives on other people's misery. I do not tolerate that kind of cancer in my company. Get out of my building before I have security physically remove you." Trent stood there, completely humiliated in front of the entire department. He turned pale, grabbed his laptop bag, and practically ran toward the elevators. Mr. Sterling then leaned over the glass balcony and looked directly down at Margaret. "Ma'am," he said, his tone leaving absolutely no room for argument. "Julian is under my professional protection now. If you ever set foot on this corporate property again, or if you ever attempt to contact him at this establishment, I will personally fund the most aggressive restraining order this state has ever seen. Security, escort this woman out immediately." 2 massive security guards flanked Margaret. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with the horrifying realization that she had completely lost. She had no power here. I was untouchable. They marched her out the revolving glass doors, and that was the absolute last time I ever saw my mother in person. A month later, the legal hammer finally dropped on Caleb. Because he was a minor with no prior criminal record, the judge in juvenile court did not sentence him to actual jail time. But it was far from a slap on the wrist. He was formally convicted of felony-level financial fraud and identity theft. The judge placed him on intensive, restrictive probation until his 21st birthday. He was ordered to complete 500 hours of grueling community service, undergo mandatory psychological counseling, and pay full, ongoing financial restitution to the bank and to me. But the absolute worst punishment for Caleb was the permanent stain on his record. His dreams of being a famous, wealthy influencer were entirely dead. Background checks for decent jobs would flag him immediately. The pristine, entitled life Margaret had tried to buy for him with my stolen money had resulted in his complete social and professional destruction. The villains had officially fallen, crushed under the absolute weight of their own monumental arrogance. 6 months later, my life looked completely unrecognizable. I had officially moved out of Marcus's cramped basement and signed the lease on a beautiful, modern, high-rise apartment right in the heart of the city. The bank had fully restored the remaining balance of the stolen $9,000, and combined with the massive salary from Mr. Sterling's firm, I finally achieved my ultimate goal. I formally launched my own independent design agency. I named it Pillar Design, a deliberate daily reminder of the absolute strength and unwavering stability I had to build within myself when the very people who were supposed to be my foundation tried to bury me. I was sitting in my spacious new living room, reviewing a massive contract for a new tech client, when my phone buzzed. It was a text message from my cousin Chloe. She was the only member of the extended family I still allowed to contact me. "Hey Julian," the message read. "Just wanted to give you a quick update. The family is completely fractured. Arthur actually filed for divorce last week. He couldn't handle the social isolation in the neighborhood anymore, and he completely blamed Margaret for the public humiliation. Caleb is miserable working minimum wage at a hardware store to pay off his court restitution." I read the words, feeling absolutely no joy, but also no sadness. It just felt like reading a news article about strangers. But then, Chloe sent a second message that completely stopped me in my tracks. "Also, I thought you should know something. I was helping Aunt Linda clean out her garage yesterday, and she had a few too many glasses of wine. She started crying and confessed something crazy. She said she was the one who originally told Caleb about your hidden business account. She saw you put the card in the desk drawer a year ago during a family visit. When Caleb complained to her that he couldn't afford a PS5, she casually suggested he borrow your card because you had thousands saved up and wouldn't miss it." I stared at the glowing screen, my breath catching in my throat. Aunt Linda, the woman who had played the sweet, innocent peacemaker. The woman who had constantly cried fake tears of sympathy for me. The woman who had hosted the barbecue where Caleb lied to the entire family. She was the one who planted the toxic seed in my 18-year-old brother's deeply entitled brain. She was the hidden manipulator, moving the chess pieces from the shadows, creating chaos just for the thrill of the drama. I didn't reply to Chloe right away. I opened my phone's contact list, scrolled down to Aunt Linda's name, and pressed block. I didn't confront her. I didn't write another viral article exposing her. She wasn't even worth the energy of my anger. That is the incredible, profound beauty of establishing absolute, titanium-clad boundaries. When you finally realize that the entire tree is poisoned from the roots to the highest branches, you stop trying to prune the bad leaves. You just take an axe, chop the whole thing down, and walk away from the dying forest. I locked my phone, tossed it onto the expensive leather sofa, and walked out onto my private balcony. The night air was crisp and cool. The massive city skyline stretched out before me, an endless sea of glittering lights, bustling traffic, and limitless possibilities. I leaned against the cold metal railing and took a deep, grounding breath. The suffocating anxiety that had defined the first 26 years of my life was completely, entirely gone. Earlier that afternoon, I had spent 2 hours on a video call mentoring Emma, a brilliant, highly motivated 22-year-old design intern I had recently hired for Pillar Design. Emma came from a rough background, heavily relying on a meager college fund to survive, and she was incredibly insecure about her talent. I spent the entire meeting encouraging her, reviewing her code, and proving to her that she was capable of greatness. Watching Emma smile, watching her confidence slowly build, I realized something incredibly profound. I had permanently broken the cycle of abuse. The generational trauma, the financial manipulation, the toxic favoritism, it all ended with me. I was not going to pass that darkness on to anyone else. I was going to use my success, my resources, and my hard-won independence to actually build people up, not tear them down to serve my own ego. Margaret and Caleb took my money in the middle of the night, thinking it would break my spirit. They thought taking away my financial security would force me into total submission. But instead, they accidentally handed me the exact key to my absolute freedom. They forced me to stop hoping for a loving family that never actually existed. They forced me to stand up, fight back, and build my own empire from the ashes of their betrayal. They took $9,000 from me, but in return, I got my entire life back. And that is a trade I would make 1,000,000 times over. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If there is one thing I want you to take away from this, it is that you should never, ever let anyone weaponize the concept of family to force you to accept horrific abuse. Blood does not give anyone a free pass to destroy your mental health, steal your future, or treat you like a doormat. Setting incredibly firm boundaries is not selfish. It is absolute survival. Have you ever faced something similar with your own family? Have you ever had to cut off toxic relatives to protect your own peace and future? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next journey. Stay strong, protect your boundaries, and I will see you in the next video.